My Thomas Story Library, Ari and Bert. This is a story about Ari and Bert the Diesels. They liked playing tricks on the steam engines and getting them into trouble. But one Halloween, their trick backfired. It was Halloween on the island of Sodor. The engines were enjoying picking up passengers dressed as monsters, witches and wizards. Thomas and Emily were going on a night run that evening. They were collecting iron trucks from Ari and Bert at the smelter's yard, which had to be delivered to the harbour before sunrise. Percy thought Halloween was scary, so he was glad that he had not been chosen for the job. At the end of the day, the tired engines returned to Tidmouth sheds. It was now time for Thomas and Emily to go on their night run. "Be careful at the smelter's yard," Percy warned. "It can be rather dark and creepy there after dark." "There's nothing to be afraid of," said Thomas confidently. "There's no such thing as ghosts. Ghosts are just silly make-believe," Emily added as they steamed away. Thomas and Emily raced across the island. They liked travelling at night, passing owls and foxes as they went. "Peep, peep! It seems quieter than ever tonight," Thomas said to Emily. "It's very dark too," Emily said, a little timidly. By the time they reached the smelter's yard, Emily felt a little nervous. She looked for Ari and Bert, but couldn't see them anywhere. She thought they must be in the smelter's shed, so she made her way towards it with Thomas following behind. "There's no need to worry," Thomas said, as he and Emily moved through the dark yard. But then they heard a huge crash. "What was that?" Emily shouted fearfully. The wind must have knocked something over," Thomas replied, but he didn't believe that was true. His pistons rattled as he trembled. He didn't feel so brave anymore. Hiding in the shadows, Ari and Bert smiled. Bert pushed an oil drum, causing it to crash to the ground. Thomas and Emily jumped as they heard it, and as they passed the hiding diesels, Ari and Bert moaned and groaned like scary ghosts. "Ooh!" "Cinders and ashes!" Thomas said in surprise. "This place is haunted!" cried Emily as she rushed towards the shed. She wanted to fetch the trucks and leave the scary place as soon as possible. In the shed, Emily saw the trucks they had come. Emily saw the trucks they had come to collect. She moved towards them without noticing a white sheet hanging from the ceiling above her. As she passed underneath, it caught on her fender and suddenly fell on her. "Ah!" she cried. "A ghost has got me!" She raced to the door, trying to get away from it. When Thomas saw what looked like a ghost engine coming towards him, he forgot about the iron trucks and ran away. Emily, covered by the sheet, raced after him. Ari and Bert were waiting outside. They were looking forward to laughing at Thomas and Emily for being such scaredy engines. But when they saw Thomas being chased by a ghost engine, they were scared too. "Oh no! There really is a ghost!" cried Ari. "Let's get out of here!" shouted Bert, and they turned and fled. Ari, Bert and Thomas raced across the island, followed by the ghost engine. As they neared Tidmouth sheds, Thomas frantically whistled to wake the other engines. Yawning loudly, Percy said, "Whatever is the matter, Thomas?" "There's a ghost engine after us!" cried Thomas. "Look! Here it comes!" Everyone gasped when they saw it approaching. They couldn't believe their eyes. But as the ghost went under a signal, the corner of the sheet caught on it, and as Emily rushed forward, the sheet fell to the ground behind her. It looks like Emily is your ghost, giggled Percy, and the other engines all laughed. Harry, Bert, and Thomas felt very foolish. Emily was just relieved that there was no ghost after all. The Fat Controller came to the shed to find out what was happening. Thomas told him about the spooky noises that had made him and Emily think the smelter's yard was haunted. So when the sheets fell on me, I thought it really was a ghost, Emily said with a smile. Do you know anything about this? The Fat Controller asked Harry and Bert, who meekly nodded. In that case, he said, you will deliver the trucks to the harbour tonight, and while you're doing that, you can think about all the trouble your trick has caused. Harry and Bert apologized to the Fat Controller and set off to the smelter's yard to fetch the trucks. As they disappeared into the distance, the steam engines heard them arguing about whose idea it had been. Now we've established that there are no ghosts, we can all go back to sleep, the Fat Controller said to the other engines. The engines were relieved that there were no ghosts, but they all agreed it would be a long time before they forgot the sight of Emily the ghost engine. My Thomas Story Library, George. This is a story about George the Steamroller. He was proud and thought he was better than the engines. He enjoyed saying rude things to them about railways, but one day he met his match. One summer, workmen brought George the Steamroller to work on the road next to the Thin Controller station. The road was being widened, so the workmen took down the wall between the rails and the road. George didn't think much of railways or steam engines, so whenever he saw an engine travelling past, he made loud, rude comments about the railway. Sir Handel hadn't met George yet. His wheels had been slipping between the rails, so the Thin Controller sent him away to be fitted with new wheels with broader tyres. When Sir Handel came back, the other engines teased him, saying he had steamroller wheels. With my new wheels, I'll be able to go faster than any of you, Sir Handel said boastfully. The engines couldn't wait to see what would happen when arrogant Sir Handel met rude George the Steamroller. That night, the engines told Sir Handel about the things George had said to them. He called us worn-out wheels on worn-out rails, René said sadly. And he said that railways are no good, so he should pull them all up and make them into roads, Peter Sam added in horror. But with your grand new wheels, you're just the engine to tackle George, Skarloey said. Sir Handel felt very important. Don't worry, he replied grandly. I'll show him who's best. The next morning, Sir Handel met George at the level crossing. So long, Sir Handel, George said casually. I've heard that you swank around with your new steamroller wheels trying to be as good as me. Sir Handel smiled. Actually, he said, I'm better than you. And he puffed smugly away. George was furious. He didn't like an engine to get the better of him. A few days later, Sir Handel was delivering a special load to the station. As he approached, he saw George slowly rolling along right next to the track. Peep, pip, peep, Sir Handel whistled loudly. But George ignored him. George was so close to the track that there was barely room for Sir Handel to get past. Peep, pip, pip, peep, Sir Handel whistled angrily. Get out of my way, you clumsy great road hog! I won't be ordered around by an imitation steamroller, George retorted proudly. Imitation steamroller? Sir Handel shouted crossly. I'm no imitation of anyone! You obviously wish you were an engine, otherwise you wouldn't be travelling so close to the rails. The two of them travelled side by side, exchanging insults as they went. No one could explain what happened next. George's driver said he signalled for Sir Handel to stop, and Sir Handel's driver said he signalled for George to stop. But suddenly, it all went wrong. There was a loud crash as George's front roller hit Sir Handel's brake van, which tilted sideways on the track. Sir Handel's fireman went to the station to get help. George and Sir Handel stood in shocked silence whilst their drivers argued about whose fault it all was. A policeman arrived just in time to stop the drivers arguing, ending in fisticuffs. Soon after, the Thing Controller arrived with Rusty and the fireman to settle the matter. I expected more from both of you, the Thing Controller said to Sir Handel and George. Your silly quarrelling has caused chaos and delay. Sir Handel and George were sorry. They now realised that their feuding had caused trouble. Luckily, they hadn't been going fast enough to cause any damage. Once George had backed away, Rusty was coupled to Sir Handel. They moved carefully forward, so the brake van tilted back onto the track. Then they hurried on to the station to deliver the special load. Come on, George, we should be going too, said his driver. We're starting a new job tomorrow on the other side of the island. George smiled. It's a shame we're leaving, he said. Having seen the engines working together in a crisis, I've decided that they're not so bad after all. In the engine shed that night, Sir Handel told the engines about the crash. Being a boastful engine, he exaggerated the story, telling them that it was nearly a terrible disaster and that it was only his quick thinking that had saved them. Wow! Said Renez in admiration. It sounds like you really showed George who's best. Rusty knew the real story, but he kept quiet to let Sir Handel have his moment of glory. The next day, the road was finished and the workmen put up a fence between the road and the tracks. When Sir Handel heard that George had gone, he was more conceited than ever, and told all the engines that he had made him go away. Rusty decided it was about time that Sir Handel was brought down a peg or two, so he told the other engines what had really happened that day. Suddenly, Sir Handel was being laughed at wherever he went. The engine said he needed his steamroller wheels to balance his big head. Sir Handel had learnt a valuable lesson. He would never again make up silly stories just to make him sound more important. And a few months later, when he met George again, they had a good chat about roads and railways and decided that they could be friends after all. My Thomas Story Library, Jack. This is a story about Jack the front loader. When he came to the island of Sodor, he couldn't wait to get to work at the quarry, but rushing in too quickly got him into trouble with the rest of the pack. It was a tingly spring morning on the island of Sodor. Thomas was excited. The Fat Controller had sent him to collect a new special from Jenny Packard. Miss Jenny ran the yard where all the diggers, cranes and lorries on Sodor lived. At the yard, Jack was waiting for Thomas. I'm Jack the front loader, he whirred proudly. I can load and unload and carry lots of things. I can haul and shunt, boasted Thomas. Thomas and Jack set off for the quarry. Is this your first job at the quarry? Called Thomas. It's my first job on the island, Jack called back. I can't wait to get to work. At the quarry, the pack was working hard. Jack wanted to say hello to everyone, but they were all too busy to stop and talk. He scooted towards Oliver, the big excavator. I'm Jack! Can I help? he asked. Oh, no, Oliver replied. Help Byron. Byron the bulldozer was shoving rock and rubble with his giant blade. I'm Jack. Can I help? Asked Jack. I don't need help, boomed Byron busily. Try Kelly the Crane. I'm Jack, Jack whirred, rushing up to Kelly the Crane. Mind my paint, snapped Laurie. You should watch where you're going. Isabella, scolded Kelly. Sorry, said Isabella sourly, but it's too busy here for rushing and pushing. The quarry can be dangerous, Kelly told Jack. Safety first. Why don't you go and help Alfie? I'm sorry, said Jack. I'll try to be more careful. Jack found Alfie the excavator digging a big hole. I'm Jack, he said. Can I help you with your work? Alfie gave him a big smile. More help means more dirt. More dirt means more fun. I'm Alfie, he replied. Jack and Alfie were soon working hard and having lots of fun. But Jack was worried that the other machines didn't like him. He wished he could really be part of the pack. The next day, Thomas shoved along the branch line, thinking about his new friend Jack. Thomas couldn't wait to get to the old quarry bridge. He knew the pack were working there. He could see how Jack was doing. I hope he's settling in, puffed Thomas. At the bridge, Jack and Alfie were loading the dump truck Max. Dust and dirt were flying everywhere. Work had never been such fun. Jack felt very proud. He had tried hard and been very careful. He hoped the pack would see what a good worker he was and Miss Jenny would let him stay. Later that day, Ned the steam shovel was moving under the bridge. I must be careful my crane arm doesn't hit the bridge, he said to himself. But Ned hadn't lowered his tall crane arm far enough. It knocked loose the important keystones from the top of the bridge. The bridge started to crumble, just as Thomas puffed towards it, unaware of the danger ahead. Jack saw the danger. Thomas! He shouted. Jack jumped in and lifted his front loader up to the bridge. He pushed with all his might. Thomas saw the flagman and his driver applied the brakes, but they couldn't stop in time. Cinders and ashes! Cried Thomas. The stones were very heavy, but Jack didn't let go. Thomas crossed the bridge safely and whooshed to a halt. Hold on, Jack! Called Kelly, and he rushed to help. But Jack couldn't hold on any longer. The bridge came tumbling down. Are you all right, Jack? Asked Kelly. I think so, he replied, but his arms were badly bent. Thomas took Jack back to the yard. Jack was afraid that Miss Jenny would be cross with him. He had jumped in without thinking about safety and damaged his arms. But Miss Jenny was pleased. Well done, Jack, she said. It's off to the fritters with you tomorrow. The pack can't have a front loader with bent arms. You mean I can stay? Whirred Jack. You're part of the crew, Miss Jenny grinned. Welcome to the pack, Jack, shouted Alfie. Kelly and Isabella cheered. Jack was so happy he couldn't think of anything to say, so he just revved his engine and bounced his bucket. Thomas was very pleased that his friend could stay. Welcome to the pack, Jack, he whistled. Peep, peep! My Thomas Story Library, Annie and Clarabelle. This is a story about Thomas's coaches, Annie and Clarabelle. They love running backwards and forwards along the branch line with Thomas, but one day they are given a chance to prove just how useful they can really be. Annie and Clarabelle were Thomas's coaches. Annie could only take passengers, but Clarabelle could take passengers, luggage, and the guard. The coaches were old and in need of new paint, but Thomas loved them very much, and they loved him too. Thomas never got cross with Annie and Clarabelle, but he did get cross with other engines on the main line who made them late. One day, Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle were waiting for Henry's train to arrive. Henry was late and Thomas was getting crosser and crosser. "How can I run my train properly if Henry is always late? He doesn't realise that the Fat Controller depends on me," he said. "I'm sure he'll be along soon," replied Annie and Clarabelle, looking around for Henry. At last, Henry's train arrived. Thomas was very cross with Henry, but Annie and Clarabelle waited patiently as lots of passengers got out of Henry's train and climbed into them. Finally, the guard blew his whistle and Thomas started at once. But as the guard turned to jump into Clarabelle's van, he tripped over an old lady's umbrella. By the time he had picked himself up, Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle were steaming out of the station. The guard waved his red flag to stop them, but Thomas and his driver didn't see him. Come along, sang Thomas. "I've lost my nice guard," sobbed Clarabelle. Annie tried to tell Thomas, "We've left the guard on the platform." But Thomas was too busy hurrying to listen. "Oh, come along," he puffed impatiently. Annie and Clarabelle tried to pull Thomas back, but Thomas took no notice. Thomas didn't stop till they came to a signal. "That silly signal! What's the matter?" Thomas asked his driver. "I don't know," replied the driver. "The guard will tell us in a minute." They waited and waited, but the guard didn't come. "Peep, peep, peep, peep! Where is the guard?" whistled Thomas. "We've tried to tell you. We've left him behind," sobbed Annie and Clarabelle. Thomas looked back along the line, and there was the guard, running as fast as he could. Everybody cheered, especially Annie and Clarabelle. "I'm very sorry," said Thomas when the guard reached them. "It wasn't your fault, Thomas. It was the old lady's umbrella," said the guard, catching his breath. "The signal is down. Let's make up for lost time." Thomas set off straight away, and Annie and Clarabelle sang, "As fast as you like! As fast as you like!" all the way to the end of the line. A few days later, Thomas was ill, and the big station couldn't make him better. He would have to go to the works. Annie and Clarabelle were sad. They would really miss Thomas. Duck came to the station to help while Thomas was away. He was very gentle with Annie and Clarabelle, and they liked him very much. "He is so calm with such nice manners," they told each other. "It really is a pleasure to go out with him." Annie and Clarabelle were sorry to say goodbye to Duck when Thomas came home, but they were very pleased to have their old friend back. They told Thomas how well Duck had managed. Thomas was a bit jealous, but he was so pleased to be home that he soon forgot. The works had made Thomas feel much better, but they had left his handbrake very stiff. This made his brakes seem as if they were on when they weren't. Thomas's driver and fireman soon learned to be extra careful so they didn't overrun the platform. But one day, Thomas's fireman was ill and a relief fireman took his place. Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle were waiting for Henry's train to arrive. The fireman fastened the coupling, but he forgot all about Thomas's handbrake. Suddenly, Thomas felt his wheels begin to move. He tried to stop, but his driver and fireman were on the platform. Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle gathered speed out of the station. "Stop! Stop!" shrieked Annie and Clarabelle, but Thomas kept on going. The signalman sent a message along the line, and an inspector prepared to stop Thomas near the airfield, but Thomas was going much too fast for the inspector to act. Quickly, the inspector climbed aboard Harold, and they took off. Below, Thomas was tiring. I need to stop. he panted wearily. Annie and Clarabelle knew that they must do something to help their friend. The coaches remembered how calm Duck was when they worked with him. They must be just as calm and steady now. Annie and Clarabelle pulled back as they went uphill and managed to slow poor Thomas down. As they neared the next station, they saw Harold land and the inspector run towards the platform. This time, Thomas entered the station slowly enough for the inspector to jump into his cab and put the handbrake on hard. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief as the train stopped. That evening, the Fat Controller came to see Thomas, Annie and Clarabelle. He told Thomas that he would have his handbrake repaired straight away, and congratulated Annie and Clarabelle for helping Thomas when he really needed them. Annie and Clarabelle were delighted, and Thomas beamed with pride. He always knew that they were the best coaches in the Fat Controller's railway. My Thomas Story Library, Rheneas. This is the story of Rheneas, a little engine who works high up in the mountains. Rheneas used to mourn that he never had any important work to do, until he realized that all jobs on the railway are important. One morning, Rusty stopped to talk to Rheneas, who was sitting in a siding all on his own. "Hello, Rheneas," said Rusty. "No passengers?" Rheneas frowned. "I used to pull important trains," he said sadly. "Now I don't take passengers often. The Fat Controller said I deserved a rest, but that was a long time ago." Just then, Rusty's driver came along. "Time to go mend some tracks, Rusty," he said. "Goodbye, Rheneas. I hope you'll cheer up soon," said Rusty. Later that same morning, the Fat Controller came to the sheds. "I have a very important job for you today, Rheneas," he said. Rheneas was very surprised. "An important job!" he cried. "Oh, thank you, sir!" "I want you to take the children on a school trip into the mountains," the Fat Controller explained. "I'll see you at the refreshment ladies' tea rooms afterwards." "Yes, sir," said Rheneas, but he was disappointed. When Rheneas arrived at the station, the children and their teacher were waiting on the platform. "A school trip into the mountains," he moaned to Rusty. "That's not an important job at all." "Yes, it is," said Rusty. "All the jobs on the railway are important." Rheneas didn't agree. He had seen all the sights many times before. He was worried that there was nothing exciting or important to show the children. The Fat Controller had told Rheneas' driver to stop at all the sites around the island of Sodor. The first stop was the old bridge. "This bridge was built a very long time ago," his driver announced. "It carries engines and trucks across the valley and into the mountains." "Ooh," said the children. But Rheneas had seen the bridge lots of times before. He didn't think it was exciting. "Next stop is the viaduct," said the driver. Driver put on the brakes, and Rheneas stopped on the viaduct. "Look at the wonderful view," said the children together. "You can see all over Sodor," driver explained. Rheneas was still unhappy. To him, the trip didn't seem wonderful at all. "I must think of something important to show them," he puffed to himself. Meanwhile, Rusty was busy repairing a small branch line. The foreman inspected the rails. He saw that the heavy rains had shifted the ground from under the tracks. "This line must be closed until it is repaired," he said. "It is too dangerous for regular runs." He put up a sign to warn other engines not to use the line. "Let's get to work straight away," said Rusty. Renes was in a hurry as he reached the points. He had made so many stops. First the old bridge, then the viaduct, and then the lake. He was afraid he would be late for the Fat Controller. I'll make up time, he puffed. But the signalman had forgotten to switch the points. Suddenly, Renes found himself on the dangerous track. Oh no! Cried Renes's driver. Renes rocketed straight past Rusty. He couldn't stop. Renes was out of control. Keep your steam up! Cried Rusty, looking worried. Hooray! Cheered the children as they bumped over the tracks. Renes puffed bravely up the hill. The ground was shaking beneath his wheels. Courage! 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 He chuffed. Then he rattled down the other side. He was determined to deliver his passengers safely. The children squealed in delight as Renes steamed over a rickety bridge. But their teacher was worried. She didn't like heights and shut her eyes. Renes was going faster and faster along the wobbly track. Driver gave a warning blast on the whistle. Peep! Peep! It was the most exciting school trip the children had ever been on. This is fun! They cheered. When Renes reached the waterfall, water splashed onto his passengers. They didn't mind at all and laughed happily, all except the teacher. Renes rocketed around a tight bend and could see the station up ahead. Not far to go! Not far to go! He chuffed. It was such a bumpy journey that the teacher's hat flew off and blew into a field where a goat ate it for tea. At last, Renes pulled into the platform. The Fat Controller was waiting to greet them. That was the best school trip ever! The children told the Fat Controller. Their teacher wasn't so sure. Well done, Renes, said the Fat Controller. You brought your passengers back safely. That is what is important. Renes beamed with pride. Now he knows that all the jobs on the railway are important.